Welcome to the last episode of Let's Chat with Chris Revill. I am your host, Chris Revill. In today's episode, I am going to be joined by one of my closest friends, collaborators, podcast friends, colleagues at times, Dwight Hurst. I asked him to do our final episode. I don't know what really to say, except thank you for anyone who's been a part of this in any way, shape, or form. While yes, the podcast itself is ending, the good news is Let's Chat is actually only beginning, truly. For those who have not kept up, and we'll be putting more stuff out there to be more consistent with our communication, one of my best friends and past guest, Nathan Peavey, and I officially started a company, started in January. We're a full-on LLC. We are on Let's Chat Podcasting is now our company. From this very feed, we're launching a very new podcast that should be out very soon called Podcasters of Podcasting. I will be a producer on that. You will hear me as a guest host every so often, but Nathan's going to be taking that over, so stay subscribed. We'll keep you in the loop online with everything going on soon. I wanted to just take a quick second for reflection from the last 11 years and everything this podcast has turned into and what it led to for me. I started this podcast in 2013 with my old co-host Mike Timney in my kitchen on Wood Street in Providence, Rhode Island. Mike would leave about 20 episodes in. I just kind of kept going with it. When I started this podcast, I worked for a nonprofit human service agency that doesn't exist anymore. I was engaged to be married. Now married. I was living in an apartment in Providence. I didn't have a kid. When I was going to start the podcast, Mike and I had come into a little extra money before the wedding and thought I could buy either a PlayStation 2 or 3. I don't know what year it was. Maybe it was a 4. Or I can get this podcast equipment that Mike and I spent a lot of money on that we probably didn't need to, but we didn't know better. And this journey, it took me for so long. I spent 11 years in health and human services. I worked all through the pandemic. This podcast became an escape for personal reasons. When my mom was sick with her dual cancers, the podcast became like the thing that kind of kept me away from having to think of that. And it grew, and no one does anything alone. And there's so many people to thank, but I want to make sure I definitely highlight Brie Benjamin, producer, friend extraordinaire, who I'm a collaborator. We're still working together now with Let's Chat Podcast and stuff, which is great. Dwight Hurst, the host of this very episode, has become a colleague, one of my best friends, just one of the greatest people I've ever gotten to know. Vern, shout out to the Vern from Cinema Recall for editing. These are people outside of Vern we've never met in real life. These are friends I've met online through the podcast world. I mean, we've gone through a few different networks, so thank you so much to Core Temp Arts, the Misfits Network, Square Pop. I mean, my history lasts for so long. A lot of these podcasts and shows, they aren't even around. I mean, I did podcast episodes where some of those guests aren't even with us anymore. Rest in power, Matthew Stewart. It's been really kind of hard to let this go, but in a lot of ways it's not. It's going to be new and great, and we're going to have more consistent episodes. I got a few Let's Chat episodes in the can that we're going to release down the road, and looking forward to releasing some new podcasts, and more importantly, really happy to continue on this community that I feel like I've kind of slept on the last couple of years. Been so focused on working on other people's stuff, it's been really nice to finally have a chance to work on my own stuff. But if you still want to hear me more consistently in the podcast space, I'm so proud to say I'm now the co-host of the Hey Rhody Podcast. Hey Rhody Podcast existed for 80-plus episodes. I was actually a guest on it. And then with one of the hosts, Sasha, had left to go start Honey Bun Social. Went in a hiatus, and when I started interviewing at Hey Rhody Media, I kind of brought it up, you guys bringing that back, and then here we are. I'm now hosting and producing with the wonderful Jenna Karp, a very podcast that was not mine to start, and it's been really great. You can find all that on heyrhody.com. And fucking A, I don't know what to say, man. This has been the journey of a lifetime, to say the least. So it's kind of emotional saying goodbye to the podcast itself, but I'm really excited for looking forward. And I can't thank all the wonderful listeners, the guests. A huge shout out to my wife, my parents, my in-laws. I can't tell me how many times in the last 7 years, having to do an episode, I had to get childcare. Victoria had to watch her. She was busy. My mother-in-law, my father-in-law, John and Pat Pasinich, I can't thank you enough. John being our first guest. the real unsung heroes of this would be like, hey, can you watch Felicity for a few hours? I got to go do a podcast. And as the podcasting kept going on, I went from like a couple hours in my bedroom to like I need to be gone for 3, 4, 5 hours at a studio somewhere. Man, just so many amazing friends and people. So I guess this is not goodbye. It's more of a see you later. And keep an eye on the feed. We're looking to drop some new episodes of Podcasters of Podcasting in the next week or two. Truly, from the bottom of my heart, I can't thank everyone enough. And here's the last episode where I try to recap and express everything, which I don't think I'll ever be able to do. All right, everyone. Let's get to it one last time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of the Let's Chat with Chris Revill podcast. My name is Dwight Hurst, and Chris has graciously given me the honor to be the guest host for this final episode of the Let's Chat podcast, with Chris in the guest seat to tell you all about the development, the changes, the accomplishments, and ultimately the destination of the Let's Chat podcast and where that podcast community and Chris's production team is taking things from here. Video game style music, as a matter of fact. It is fading out like a pro. Hey, everybody, welcome to the wonderful world of Let's Chat with Chris Revill. That was the current name of the show, right? It used to be Revill and Friends, which was nice, but it didn't have your whole name. So,
yeah, that was
nobody wants
another
that.
moment. This is it. This is the last episode indefinitely.
And that is the thing, right? And when you say indefinitely, people sometimes mean forever with that, and sometimes people mean not sure yet. But this is not a short-term thing. This is a project-based, change-based decision, right?
Yeah, probably something I probably should have done a while ago and just had never got around to. But yeah, I decided I officially wanted to wrap this one up because we're going to be launching a new podcast on this feed very soon that I'm producing but not hosting, but I'll pop on there sometimes as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. And probably what we'll do is we'll talk about Let's Chat, and then we'll say more details at the end, but that's good up front, I think, to let people know here's why, that there's
the feed will actually be active again.
Feed, right?
Yep.
And it's cool to have it coming on the feed because then people still have the arch rival data or archival data, if you prefer, to go back and review the old episodes and things.
Please do.
Assume. Yeah. So
there's some good ones I'm proud of.
Oh yeah. And we're going to get into that today. Chris, and by the way, I'm Dwight Hurst, host of the Broken Brain podcast. And if you've listened to the show and you've listened to my show, you probably know both of us. Chris and I are some of the oldest podcast friends on Earth, I think. No, but we are, we're the oldest podcast friends of each other, I think. One of anyway.
2014?
It was something like that. Yeah, that's when I look at that now and I'm like, I started in 2014, 2015. So you and I are amongst the old guard. We can proudly stand with the old dudes who are doing it because we are now old dudes as well. So it's exciting to see you branching into. You've really made this has really influenced your career choices as you've gone into social media, as you've gone into different related fields and directly into podcasting projects. And that's really impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a wild 10 years.
Well, we're going to review those 10 years. We're going to talk about what Let's Chat has been, and then after that, we'll talk about kind of where it's going, where you're going with the productions and things like that. But so first of all, we're going to review some of the high points that you've had, and I think one thing I've always admired about you is your ability and tenacity when it comes to guest procurement, that you've had some people that I've been quite jealous of. And in 2013 that was the genesis of the Let's Chat. So let's go back to a younger, inspired Chris Revill back in 2013. Yes. Tell us a little bit about the concept and how you decided to start it out.
So my friend Laura Carr is the spark that lights the match. Is that the saying?
Yeah,
is the spark.
It is
So
now,
I had
but
been.
I think it is before too.
This, yeah, the spark that lights the fire. So I had been a fan of podcasts. I was listening a lot. I'd moved to Providence, was walking everywhere, and just was listening for a while. Wanted to start one, probably was never gonna. It was one of those things like I could probably do that. And then my friend Laura Carr and her boyfriend at the time, she just like literally rolled her chair over me. We used to work together at a human services agency that's no longer there. And she's like, you got to meet Mike. You have to meet Mike. You guys should do that. You should do it together. And then we ended up being in the same like med training. And he's like, dude, we should start a podcast. Like it was literally like that. And then he had the skill set to like research and buy equipment and actually put our feet to the fire and actually do it. Mm-hmm. So I think we had maybe first like 10 or 15 episodes. I had a co-host who decided it wasn't for him at some point and left amicably. But yeah,
so far, no, that's
when he left though. He left all the equipment behind, and I got like hooked.
Oh, nice. No, and that's always great when you can have those encounters and they go well. I, as we were coming up in the biz at the same time in this art form, people may take for granted today. Any of you young guns out there who just went and bought a podcast kit on Amazon or eBay, or just went and read, any subreddit or anything that's like, here, get this, get that, get this mic. There wasn't that then. It was a little more, I wouldn't say purposefully gatekeepery exactly, but there just wasn't the data out there. It just
didn't exist. It just, it wasn't, the popularity of it wasn't really there yet.
And Googling, and certainly not kind of launching your own. And so kind of doing a lot of Googling with general audio information, right? Was what was there. And I remember when I made the switch to XLR cords instead of USB, and then kind of made the switch back. And it was a lot of experimenting. I have a pile of little small soundboards and lavalier mics that can testify to the evolution of that. And I'm sure, you've been through this with equipment and such, It's been interesting to see how that has blown up, and now you can go on and say, here's one of 1 or 2 or 3 mics that most people recommend you use, and you can go on forums and things, and it's really cool for anyone who wants to start. And now, of course, there were hosting services, but a lot of people are doing their own website. Anyway, so there was a lot. Your first guest was your father-in-law.
Yeah. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, well, it's similar. My first guests were just colleagues of mine. Mine show's focused on psychology, and interestingly enough, you and I working in the same field at the time. You were a social worker in a hospital program.
Yeah,
and so we had connected through podcasting, and you came on my show and talked about that stuff. But so I was just grabbing people who rented the office through the wall from where I was, literally down the hall, and had some semi-permanent co-hosts for a while. So for you, what was some of the goals of your show, of what you wanted to showcase?
Yeah, well, it's so funny because I think what you start off with and what you end up with can be different, which is a good. In the very original incarnation of the show, we were the four podcasts that we were really modeled after was the Joe Rogan Experience, Girl on Guy with Aisha Tyler, and the Jeff Rubin Show. So this idea that we would have serious talks and be vulnerable, and then also do episodes just dedicated to Mike and I just recapping the first season of The Sopranos and Bob's Burgers and pop culture things, because they weren't the idea. And then the idea was going to be we would host it together. Sometimes it would be Mike and I, sometimes it would be Mike and a guest, sometimes it would be me and a guest, sometimes it would be Mike, me and a guest. And that was kind of the idea. And then quickly, I'd say within the first 20 episodes or less, it just turned into more of a long form conversational with me and a guest, or two guests or something like that.
And you've kind of grown into specializing your guests. A lot of them are musicians, creators, comedians.
Yeah, definitely. People, I was always folks from the worlds of podcasting, punk rock, and pop culture were the 3 categories that we kind of fell into. And I used to get a lot of guff for the diversity of guests, because sometimes it's be a singer of a hardcore band, and then it would be a scientist, and people are it doesn't make sense. But I was it's just how I am. I like a lot of things. So I like that stuff.
I was one of the things I've learned from you as a podcaster is the philosophy of this is ours. We should do what we want. Ours I don't mean hours of editing, although that is part of it too, but ours, OURS, this is our project and nobody gets to tell us what to do.
Yeah, it's our time.
Exactly. There's a lot of best practice recommendations you can see people make. I'm going to air quote best practice because, once again, it's an art form and people get to do what they choose to do. And you have all kinds of people out there that are like, no, you got to do this, you got to do that. But I've learned from you to just not listen to that as much as just listen to where it goes.
Yeah.
And so your flexibility of having different kind of guests, I think strengthens the show a lot.
Yeah. I always, like, early on too, I would always say, like, come for the guest, stay for the host. Like, always my idea is, like, you're probably not going to listen to it for me because I'm just this, I'm not a name.
We're not Conan O'Brien or President Obama.
Yeah. Like, I wouldn't listen to it for me, but if you have someone on from your world that you like, and then maybe you'll stick around for the next one, or you'll dig in the back archives and, like, and that is eventually what happened. I mean, there's like years of like nothing happening. Like, it took like a few years, but it was a hobby. So, like, it didn't matter. Well, it did matter, but like I was hitting my own personal marks that meant the world to me, but no one else could see or care about. And it just, like, also provided, like, even I look back now, I didn't think this at the time. Like, my mom was sick, really sick. She had dual cancer where it removed to Providence. So that podcast also became a way to, like, put a lot of nervous energy to that. And then years down the road, Victoria and I had to struggle with infertility. So, like, there was something to it. It was the constant in my life as things weren't perfect. And it always was like, well, I got to block out some energy and space for this. And when things were really hard, it was really helpful to be like 2 or 3 hours where I can interview, research, edit, and just not think about anything and just drive myself crazy with the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the things that's great about it is the guests and the people that we get to meet, other podcasters. As we mentioned, we got to meet each other, which is probably the best that's happened from podcasting as an art form, is our friendship. However, we get to meet. Not only do we get to meet all kinds of cool people, it's an in, right? We can contact someone. I found that in my field originally, and now I include a lot of creators, and I've been doing a lot of interviews with filmmakers and things where you can reach out and say, hey, what's the media process here? I can apply for something. I can look for a press pass. I can directly email someone who I admire, whether they're a podcaster or music, whoever it is, and to say, I'd like to talk to you, period, would sound like, oh, who's this stalker? Whereas if we say, have a podcast, you want to come on, that's something of value and also a community thing. And so that's one of the things that's my favorite about it is the accessibility we have to people out there in the world. Just basically, I've never met anyone who's like offended to be invited on a podcast, even if they're not interested, right?
Yeah, no, it sounds cheesy, but it's really about the friends we made along the way.
Yes.
I have lifelong friends, business partners, like friendships, people I've met online through the podcast who I've worked for them, or we work together, or they've hired me, or we get to do creative projects, or we've met online and then we met in person, which has happened a bunch. Like, people from other countries. It's crazy. It's wild. And sometimes too, you stay in touch with people and they're on their rise to do whatever they're doing. And, like, you meet, like, I met Bob Dearden, who was a writer for iZombie at the time, and we come in a couple times. We became friends and, like, stayed friendly. And then he went to go work on Cobra Kai. So all of a sudden, without trying, I have an in at Cobra Kai. And there was a lot of those of, like, getting people before they kind of on their way up. Like, Dana Schwartz is like was a big Twitter person, but she's done some great stuff recently. She hosts Noble Blood podcast. I don't have any contact with her, but it was like, I think I was the very first podcast she was ever on, and I was really proud of that.
Yeah, you have had some big people. I'm going to name a couple of people on here. We have a little timeline that you were cobbling together that's really shows all that you have accomplished. And then a way of guests, particularly John Termilio is
John Termilio. He was the first, I would say, guest. He was the first person I knew. So he was in I wouldn't say a band called, they're still active, Folly, which is dear friends of mine. They're like friends of mine, but that band, I think they had ended at that point. And I think I, like, messaged him and literally drove, like, I was in New Jersey that weekend with my wife visiting her family, and, like, drove to his house in New Jersey, set up everything, like, huge mixer in his, like, living room, in his, like, kitchen or whatever, while his, like, now wife was, like, making dinner, and we just talked forever. And of course things go wrong. And that was like the first, like, I think name I had. Because first I went through all my friends, as many friends as I can think locally, because I didn't know how to do remote. And then I was like, well, I want to talk some names, and there needs to be some sort of oral history of Folly, because the band was over at that time. Oh yeah, they've been long gone. I think they ended in 2008. So that was like the first, for me, that was like a personal big guest.
And it's that feeling of being able to do that and interact, and because then you're providing the oral history in a way, right? You're helping to form that and to have it out there, and that's something that stays out there online. So yeah,
and it's cool. Feeling. I grew up my teenage years with that band, so like I always felt like I looked up to them, and then all of a sudden, like, are we peers? Like that, I've had that a bunch, and it's kind of cool to be like, oh my god,
yeah. There's, and speaking of remote, that's another thing. Back then, there weren't all of the remote. We're on StreamYard right now recording this, right? And I use Zoom a lot and all this. The other side of it was, there was Skype and all that stuff, but there was a greater percentage of people who didn't know how to use those things.
No, it was tough. It was like MP3 Skype recorder, and then you're asking a complete stranger if they could learn how to audio record simultaneously to record your tracks, which I think what's probably, looking back, why it led to talking to more podcasters. I'm like, it's like, I did an interview with, what's his name? Mike Sachs, he was a editor for Vanity Fair. He's wrote in a bunch of great books. One of my favorite, Poke in the Dag Frog. Nice guy. But like, we had to download each other. We had to like walk him through how to do everything. And like that, there's multiple episodes are lost because of that. And it's not someone's fault. I actually lost one episode because the guest just never emailed me their half. So like, it's not their fault, but it was just like, it wasn't like it is now.
I remember on Skype once I was talking to someone in Africa, and there was this weird like radio station that was being picked up over the Skype line. And so nothing to do about it. When I released the episode, I just told people to pretend it was an episode of This American Life and that we juiced it up with music. But so kind of overcoming some of those things, once again, learning how to do that. Some of the other notable guests that you've had is let's say you got Michael Price, writer from Vulture and the Huffington Post, Matt Koff.
Oh yeah. So Michael Price, that was the first true big interview I think I ever did. So Michael Price is the co-creator of F is for Family with Bill Burr. And he's a long time Simpsons writer, long time. Like he's been there for like 10, 15 years, he wrote a bunch of animation I loved. And then we stayed in touch. Nice guy. But because of that, I got a write-up in Vulture and Huffington Post because of that.
Mm-hmm.
That was like first. I got a national media before I got anything local.
Yeah,
that was like the first. Like, oh my god! Yeah. I remember I was sitting in my old office at Butler Hospital, opening my phone and seeing myself tagged on Twitter, and like it was actually Split Sider at the time, which became Vulture, which was like that New York magazine, and it was like. That was the first moment I could show to my grandparents and my parents and people like older than me and didn't know, like, see, I told you I'm doing something.
Yes. Somebody
nothing happened.
It. Yeah.
Numbers wise, nothing happened, but like, God, was that the greatest feeling? And then like I invited the guy who wrote the article onto my podcast after that because I was like, thank you. And Mark Hershon, great guy. And then he was actually on Jock Doc too. Like he wrote about London's podcast. He's great. He's done a lot for the independent podcast world.
Yeah, being part of that too. You're kind of, it's kind of it's not the Wild West like it was, as we said, but it's Wild West, pirate radio, whatever you want to call it. There's this ability to sort of do what you want. I wanted to mention too, you had Matt Koff, who Daily Show writer.
That was a big one too. I remember which is actually really special to me because my co-host for that one was Nathan Peavey, who's actually now my business partner and going to be hosting this very feed. And, Nathan and I went to the Columbus Theater in Providence to go see the writers of the Daily Show tour. And Matt was a Daily Show writer. And it was great. So I tweeted everyone on that show and Matt responded and we chatted for a minute on Twitter when Twitter was way better. And he's like, yeah. And that was my first time I ever, that was my first interview. I was like, oh my God, this guy has an Emmy.
Yes.
I had a few Daily Show crew adjacent people like Kevin Bertini and Adam Lash. They all were like interned, or Kevin Bertini was the warm-up comic for like Daily Show, Colbert Report, Larry Wilmore. He's like, so there's I got like kind of these weird New York comedy scene people.
Yeah, that's amazing. And of course, Daily Show, writing staff, big history in podcasting too. You've still got the Flophouse out there with the former head writers that are hosting that show, a bigger show. Some of the connection that you see. And another, this is another thing that I learned from you is talking about being a peer with someone and saying, anybody who is, any podcast out there is an indie podcaster, and anybody out there listening, you are a peer of those people. They may get more numbers, or they may have been around, or be bigger names, but to be in the field and in the realm of saying, wow, we have that in common with those people, and that we're working in the same art form. And I think that helps when back in the day where no one knew what the hell a podcast was, and compare it with now where, everybody's mailman's dog has a podcast. It seems like people kind of underestimate it. And so having the ability to, number one, know, am I really an artist in this field? And also, do I feel pride about it? Those things are huge. And that's something I find inspiring about you is, you've been dedicated to that concept of being a presence in the field in whatever capacity and corner. Right. Yeah.
Oh, very kind. Thank you.
How would you say, thinking of it as art or as a craft, when do you think you started? Was it when you started to notice some of those things you could show your family, or was it when you started to get some guests that, basically you knew of outside the podcast? Or when was it you decided to say to yourself, I am an artist, I am working the craft of podcasting?
It was that Vulture article was the first time I was like, oh. And then honestly too, like, I remember getting a lot of compliments early on from people, and also, but like, writing them all off, be like, you're really good at this. And then kind of like within a couple of years, noticing my peer, the people I came with, a lot of them stopped, and I kept going. I think that was the kind of like, I was like, okay, I always think of it as like comedians, like there's stand-up comedians, and then there's actors who do stand-up, and then they stop doing stand-up to go act. And I felt like that with podcasting, and I don't belittle anyone for it, but I just felt like I was like, no, I think I'm cut a little differently. Like I'm never going to stop this in whatever way it is. And, and whatever, and opportunities did come my way, and which I've taken, and I'm hosting another podcast right now that I was once on, so it's pretty great.
That's right.
So I think
host the Hey Rhody podcast.
I co-host that with Jenna Kaplan. It's been really great. It's actually the company I work at. It's for my company, so it's really wonderful. Belle, get out of here.
It's nice to have something. The new guest on the show is Chris's cat. So let's interview.
She's why we always call it the cat cave.
Let's slap a lavalier mic on that cat and see.
She only shows up when I'm on the computer.
Well, see, this will help because it makes Instagram and TikTok reels more popular to show an animal. So why not audio as well? So the guest that I have been the most jealous of is you had Travis McElroy on your show, right?
Yeah, that was wild. I actually feel kind of bad because I didn't really feel like I deserved that one. But I had gotten that right up in Vulture. And then a mutual podcast friend of mine who actually we did a podcast together. His name's Jacob Haller. And then we found out we lived like 3 streets away from each other. Like we just didn't know that. Like I didn't even know he was in Providence. We met on Twitter. There was nothing to do. Like it was like, oh, you're from Rhode Island. Oh, you live in Providence. I'm like, what? So it ended up being wild. But anyway.
Yeah, I've had similar. Yeah, that's funny when that happens.
Yeah. At some point, Travis put something on Twitter, and I actually wasn't aware of him, to the effect of like looking to do podcasts. Who should I do? And Jacob responded to his tweet of like, you should do Let's Chat with Chris Revill. And then I was like, I looked at him like, all right. And then it just happened. So that Vulture article, my brother and me was also got written up in as like, there's a few podcasts besides me. And so I was like, love to have you on. We were both featured in this article. I don't know why he said yes, but he did.
If I was ever mentioned in the same breath or article as my brother and me, holy cow, that's pretty cool. And anybody, I would say most people who are into podcasts have heard of either Bam Bam Bam, the McElroy brothers, or at least Maximum Fun, which is the network that they belong to, and some of those associated shows.
Yeah.
Some of the ones that have been around the longest.
That was a cool time too, because around that time too, it was like that peak of like, I would go to bookstores and record stores and go places, and people I've interviewed their book is there. Like eventually all these little tiny connections, like, oh, any TV show, like, oh, I know that writer or something like that. So I remember going into a bookstore and seeing one of their books they had. I'm like, oh my God, I've interviewed Travis. Like we didn't stay in touch or anything, but it was very nice.
Yeah, that's really cool. And at the time, once again, I was like, wow, there's somebody who not only is a great podcaster, but does a lot of charity work and also is very mental health conscious and savvy, and talks openly about anxiety and ADHD and stuff like that, as well as so great comedian. Yeah.
It's so funny that episode after Travis released, because I wasn't, I would have a big guest, but they weren't all big. The next one, the release after it, was actually Bree, who I met on Twitter and then would later become my business partner with Let's Chat Media. So like, it's so funny how like I can look through it and be like, oh, this interview, and then years later we're doing this together.
And we should plug Bree. What's their company? She and her husband do wonderful things with social media and things like that. You can see it in my track as well. We'll
put them in the show notes because I can't remember.
Yeah, we're gonna plug that in the show. Anyway. You're saying they do a lot of different work with podcasts and with promotion. And once again, another great outcome of podcasts existing is us getting to meet each other. In fact,
she was like the first fan. She was the first person that I would interact with online who I had no connection to or didn't know anyone I knew, but somehow found the show and liked it. And then we would become friendly and became friends. So then I was like, well, if you like the show, you have to come on it, because like that meant the world to me.
We had all three of us worked together as well, making a pilot for Selwyn Jones, who's George Floyd's uncle, and has become he pops up throughout the media now, and has become quite an advocate, outspoken person for police reform and racial equality. And as a matter of fact, is involved with a nonprofit. He came on my show a while ago, and so it was interesting to help make. We essentially made a video audio pilot for him to be able to use.
Yeah, with like a real media company. That was a big moment too. Like when that happened, I was like, so I called you and Bree. I'm like, all right, let's do this. It was, and none of us have met in real life, which is still wild.
That's exactly. And that's once again, going back to your connections. That was you. The way it happened. I get a call from you. That's like, hey, this guy, and here's something that not only, is a opportunity to do something, but is connected to social justice and things we all believe in.
Yeah,
I think was really cool.
I always remember at my old job at Butler, I used to say that was going to be either that was going to be the thing, or it's the thing that's going to lead to the thing.
And that's part of it too. I think is that belief. As I've re-engaged with a couple of things with my podcast is tied to my therapy, counseling kind of practice and things that I do too. And so it's actually helped me lately to reinvigorate not only my connection with podcasting, but my connection with mental health and psychology too. And having that excitement. And I'm curious, I want to ask a question of you about this. I'm forming it in my head. As far as how podcasts can engage and initiate excitement and passion with people out there, the listeners and those that participate in it. I don't know. I just kind of want to get your thoughts on that, of the energy and the passion that can be involved and that can be prompted. Yeah, I
mean, it's a great adult play date.
Oh, I love that. That's a great concept.
Yeah, but it's also like we were saying before, it is like the best way to like talk to your idols and heroes or anyone you want. And like when I was doing more hobbyist, and then things started to change. Like when you start doing it outward, like, oh, I want this to lead to something, but like, it's literally just a megaphone. And even if it's not monetizing it, like if you can get someone to listen to you for an hour, that's wild. Like that's absolutely wild. And so what ended up happening for me and it was like, I would always say I'm more of a wait to be asked to play rather than asked to play kind of person, which I wish it wasn't the case. But what ended up happening for me was people just started asking me to work for them. I wasn't like seeking it out. It was, but unbeknownst to me, a podcast, you have hundreds of hours of your voice. And as the industry grew, people are watching you if they listen or not. Like even I got opportunities from people who didn't like listen to the show, but they were aware of it because I was always posting about it. And they had an opportunity. I would be the first one that pops in their head. So then that led to like work, eventually led to full-time work. Like I left my job, I left a career in healthcare.
Yeah.
So
it kind of paving the way.
It's the best marketing. It really is. Because even the job I have now, I had interviewed the editor-in-chief Elise in 2020. And then I was on Hey Rhody. So then I went in for my interview. I knew Nick, I knew Elise. Shelly, the person who's interviewing me, had heard me on Hey Rhody Podcast. So like she already knew me before I walked in that door and got the job.
We will return to Let's Chat with Chris Revill after this ad spot.
At Cinema Recall, we want to present to you the finest in film analysis.
Yeah, like action and gore and sex.
We will look at classics by Kubrick, Lynch, Godard, De Palma, and Coppola.
I don't know who the that is, but I'm looking at classic bodies of Christina Hendricks, Keanu Reeves, Salma Hayek, Ryan Reynolds.
We are a serious show for film lovers who enjoy indie foreign films, art house gems, and classic black and white features.
Well, I enjoy big budget blockbusters with great action and sexy people. Maybe our podcast can celebrate all aspects of films, like people who feel like your weird way and like people who feel like my weird way can like get together, man.
They can?
Yeah.
Huh. You know, I like that.
Cinema Recall is available everywhere you find great podcasts. Follow them on Facebook and Instagram under Cinema Recall Podcast and on Twitter at cinema_recall.
And now back to Let's Chat with Chris Revill with special guest Dwight Hurst of Broken Brian's podcast.
I'm gonna. I have a breaking news update. I texted Bree. She said her business name is Data By, which is DATABYH. They do not currently have a Facebook or website right now, but it is personal referral. So if you hit Chris or I up on social media, if you need to make like an ad deck, if you need to make a one sheet, if you're working in any kind of podcast or influencer sphere, you can.
She actually designed our Let's Chat podcast and website for Nathan and I.
Oh, yes. When she did a one sheet for me as well, and as well as working on the Rise Today Inspirational podcast with Erica Harris. Yeah. She did give a email too, which is the name I just said, Data, BHY, DATABHY, the number 3, @gmail.com. So anybody can reach out through there too if they are interested in any of those things. So I'm just putting that out there.
Awesome.
We plug for Bree because she rocks.
Think yeah, Bree's amazing. We did a lot. We did such So then 2017 rolls around, and I'm having my daughter, who's going to be born after a long struggle with IVF, and I was like, I'm going to take a pause from the podcast. I recorded a ton of stuff, and then I lost 7.5 episodes due to a computer error. And
hate that.
And then she was born, and then that was not really a great experience. And I quit and didn't tell anyone.
You've been on my show to talk about this with some.
Yeah, it was the only time I ever cried on the podcast.
Medical trauma. Yes, that was there with some of the real scary things. I've had that too, where there's been personal reasons for a hiatus for a little bit and things like that. Once again, it's ours, so that's cool, right?
Yeah, I mean, if there's money involved, it'd been different. But at this point, It's still my hobby. It's still fun. I'm still like doing this because I want to do it, not because anyone was paying me. So maybe it would have been different. It was my job, but.
What do you think the interaction was between your personal recovery from trauma and the podcast, the role that it played, taking a break and then eventually picking it back up again?
It just was always just have this need for connection I have. And then especially it was just the perfect way to do it with people who I admired or looked up to or wanted to connect with. Never really locally until 2017, 2018 is kind of when that switch happened. But yeah, it became a place, whether it was on mine or going on other people's podcasts, to like just kind of talk about things openly and trustworthy, and also know that there's edits and stuff like that. And like I don't think I did some little ones about, I'm sure I've talked about it throughout the years. But like it was very cathartic. And as you know, when you put yourself out there, you get back what you put out. And so like I specifically from going on Broken Brain to talk about it, that ticket, which got a lot of like nice feedback. And then I felt like people who had listened felt like they knew me a little bit differently or better. Yeah. And be like, oh, it's not all sunshines and roses. It's like, no, sometimes you have undiagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder.
It's something that going to the point you made, you don't spend an hour a week or even a couple hours a month talking to or listening to many people. There's a lot of people in our lives who we don't do that with, particularly, like family, obviously, sure. But even then, you don't always sit and listen to what they have to say for, a solid hour every week or something. And that vulnerability, and that's another thing maybe to delve into here, is the role that vulnerability plays. What is I don't know for sure. I feel like with those that are, you've got the B and C list celebrity tier of podcasts. I find like the A list celebrity podcasts, most of them don't last as long. And the ones that are in the moderate level of like kind of normal, but they're working professionals in comedy, things like that. Those ones seem to persist. You got your comedy bangs and I'm not trying to label anyone on there as a C list or B list, whatever, but people who aren't necessarily blockbuster actors, but they're people who are very, very strong influencers and presence in that field. And then you've got the indie podcast. And I think somewhere from that level down, there's a certain amount of vulnerability that you get. For my money, I think independent podcasts have more vulnerability.
Sure.
Right.
Because and you know how much shit I took early? Can I tell you how much shit I took early on for being an independent podcaster who was like very openly wanting to become professional? Like, I had a lot of ambition and I got a lot of guff from people, like relationships ruined over it. Like people like, no, it's got to be free and blah, blah, blah. You're here for the blah and, whatever. But I was like, at some point, I was like, I put a lot of time and energy and money and effort into this. Like, I have no qualms. Like, my goal, I wanted to be on Stitcher. I wanted to be on Earwolf. I wanted to be like, Earwolf was the dream. Like, that we got that far. Like, we got to the waiting room, is like to say, like, we got to
pitching, right? Yeah.
We got to pitch to networks. And when that kind of, they didn't get picked up, was the pivot moment of like, I got to put my focus on something else because I needed to make money.
Well, that's a funny thing. I feel like there is a lot of entitlement in our age where people are like, I can't believe that the show that I listen to has ads or plugs their Patreon. You get that. I think a large amount of listeners understand that, and maybe at the most they'll hit the 30-second forward here and there if they don't love the ad. But a lot of people understand. But there's a lot of people, and I've been surprised, even independent podcasters and people who will post in forums saying like, I would never run an ad. I would never charge for anything. And so much of podcasting is absolutely free. So when you have an opportunity to say, hey, if you use this code, I might get a few pennies here or there. If you subscribe to Patreon, you get an extra episode or whatever that is, to say like, by the way, if you're turning out an hour every week or every other week, that soon stacks up to hundreds and hundreds of hours, especially over the years, of free material that is being put out there. And if you can't stand a, 30 to 90 second ad, then I guess that's kind of entitled, is my opinion. Yeah.
No, I'm with you. And this was specifically from a small niche group within Twitter and like that Pattern Family. Remember that hashtag Pattern Family?
I remember that. Yeah.
That was a big one for me. Twitter was great.
They were like, hashtag us, and it helps promote the show and anything. I
met a lot of people.
Yes, a lot of cool people. A lot of cool people.
It was a great hashtag. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know. They're still around? I don't even know.
I don't use Twitter anymore.
I don't do very much with it. I think my show automatically puts an update every time I release an episode on, X. See, people are out there going like, what the hell are they talking about? I don't know. What's this Twitter? Crashing into telephone poles, not understanding what it is. I understand. But anyway, Elon Musk he's on the line. Hold on. Let's patch him in. So with that, let's talk about maybe some of the things that are your biggest takeaways from doing specifically the show Let's Chat.
Yeah, no one does anything alone. Like, as much as I did the booking and guest booking and then interviewing and editing and marketing for the majority of the show, not the whole show, because around 2020, 2019, eventually I built a team. But even by doing all that, no, I absolutely couldn't do it all by myself. I ended like people like you. I met so many wonderful people, supportive family, stuff like people, the hidden stuff. Like my wife would be always being super kind to like give me the time to do it, or the space, or sometimes like my in-laws or my parents like watching Felicity so I can go record and little things like that. And then, I was fortunate to be on a few different networks, only one of them which still exists. But early on, I was a part of Square Pop, which was kind of like a online fanzine. And then from there, I was on the Misfits network for a long time, which was run by Aaliyah Janine, who was a comedian, former porn star. I definitely didn't fit in that world, but it was awesome. Like, Big J Okerson, is that his name? Was like the big podcast guy who was on that network. It wasn't really my world, but it was fun. And then the Core 10 Barts network, which was on for until I quit the first time. And then within that, doing like various like TV Ate My Brain, and we got to do shows within that, like so that the community. Mm-hmm. So I guess the biggest takeaway is that you just it really is a tribe, like a community.
And also, if you gravitate to the right areas, I know for you and me, there's importance around this. And Quartet Barnes was founded, and still the things that happen. A lot of those shows have been on hiatus, or the other people are busy. Although they're still creating a lot of them out there and doing things on a local level or other levels, but they're committed and founded upon principles of diversity, both diversity of the queer community, diversity of racial diversity, and podcasting has, typically, historically not been the most diverse.
Well, that's everywhere. That's not even podcasting.
It's sure. No. But yeah, as far as the starting of it and still, and so, Carly Beaumont, our friend, and who you used to call her Mom when we do TV Ate My Brain. You'd be like, Mom's going to be mad.
Yeah. And just like I made so many internet friends. And I guess the biggest takeaway is that you don't realize it, but varying on how you're doing it, if you're doing everything yourself in the beginning or at any level, you're teaching yourself a very valuable skill that people can make that people pay a lot of money for. Like I made all my bones doing post-production for other people. Like the hosting is the hardest thing to make money off of. The hosting is the thing that is my favorite, but and I have like a lot of friends too, like my buddy who I met through the podcast, Chuck Staten. He does a lot of work for like Kevin Smith and like Tuesdays with Stories. And same thing. He got into the back end on production. Like that's how you make your bones. So like, an audio editor makes like $55 an hour.
Yeah.
Like editing, a good one.
I know for myself, like
social media.
Yes. I've definitely made more by being a producer than I have by being a host on my own show as far as money goes. Although, for me, it also ties in with my business and everything. So who knows?
Well, I think the host part is like the advertising budget, right? Like this is the sweat equity. Yes. And then, yeah. So I think that's part of it too. Like and now there is an industry you can work in. And like there was nothing in Rhode Island except one place for a long time. And I didn't want to just like the fact that there's like jobs now for this stuff. It's wild. I mean, I know there always has been, but the industry was small and in bigger cities. And it's the fact that it's here, it's kind of crazy.
Well, and also, I learned this from our friend Michael Deniston, who did versus Warhorse and has done a whole bunch, and 99 from 99 movie podcasts that, you have to know what you're after. Are you looking to be Joe Rogan or whoever? I'm not looking to be Joe Rogan, and there's a lot of ways I'm not looking to be Joe Rogan. So are you looking to be, let's pick someone else, Jesse Thorne, Scott Aukerman? Are you looking to be someone who this is a big part of your living? That'd be great. Sure. For most people who are doing it, but also saying like, am I looking to get tons and tons of followers, or am I looking for a tight-knit community, or am I looking to express my passion, my art, or am I looking for industry access to my own industry, to know experts that are in it, or to get, I know whenever I get a film screener from a film festival or a publicist reaches out, exactly, that it's exciting. And once again, community and connection, which we all need, we all crave.
And the industry's changed so much because for years, there was no purpose of being like a Rhode Island podcast didn't mean anything. There's no marketing value in that. Like it just did not matter. Podcast was very online. And then post-pandemic, the industry's changed where it's actually become like hyper local is actually your best bet. Like I kind of had the switch where I started meeting people in my community and have built a community. Yeah, no, fuck it. I'll take credit for that. I definitely feel like I've built the community within the Providence. It's had different waves of it, but like now Nathan and I host podcast meetups regularly. Like we've moderated panels, and we were a part of a podcast community that was meeting in person. The pandemic happened, and then a lot of it didn't come back, and we're like, fuck it, let's just do it ourselves. And now it's like a whole nother generation of people I'm meeting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, of people. It's cool. Like, it's really cool. Like, it's at some point you just do it. There was definitely a long period where I felt like I was the old man on the hill. Like everyone I knew stopped. I didn't know anyone else. It was kind of embarrassing, but I was like, I'm not quitting. And then at some point you become the like old man you go from like the cranky old man on the hill, and if you play your cards right, you become like the legend, or you become the guy that inspired people. And like I just rode all the waves and stuck it out long enough where I'd meet people online and in person who've like they had listened to my show or something like that, or I was their first podcast or something like that, and it means a lot to me.
Well, you've definitely become a pillar in the indie podcast community and continue to be, you know, whether you're, I was going to say on camera, on mic or behind mic or mic adjacent or just producing and doing all those things, you definitely are, as well as, you know, as I've come to know you personally, just basically being a hell of a guy. And that's something that means a lot to me. Tell everybody, let's bring it home with letting people know, what are they going to see pop up on this feed?
Yeah.
What are the future things? I'm hoping, by the way, I'm hoping this frees up a little more time for you to come on our Patreon show that we do for my show.
Absolutely. But I just want to shout out one more guest, though, before we move it on, because I think this ended up being the most meaningful, emotional thing from the podcast that was very unexpected to anyone. I'm a huge fan of the band Streetlight Manifesto. I've been listening to them since like 2003, 2004. Fanatic. Long story short, ended up interviewing the bass player with John from Folly. So that was like a really big deal because they're a media shy band. Pete was great. Ended up finding this Facebook group called Friends of Streetlight Manifesto that I met my friend Sonetta, who's become a good friend, guest collaborator. And she introduces me to Matt, the trumpet player, and took about 2 years to get him to say yes and come on the show, because this is a band that does not do interviews. They don't talk to the media. They don't do it. By the way, I had a lot of guests who don't talk to they don't do media, but they'd come on my show. So Matt come on, we ended up doing 2 episodes because we ended up becoming friends. And then that December, I went to go see them play in Boston, and we got to hang out and smoke a blunt after the show. And we stayed friends. Me, him, and Sonata had like a chat. And he actually unexpectedly passed last year. And it was awful. Like, it was just heartbreaking. 41, he had a little girl. Like, we connected a lot about being dads. And like the whole time I was like, oh my God, this is the guy from the show. And then, it's terrible to lose anyone. But then after that happened, I connected with this family to be like, hey, I have this episode that we were asked not to air. So like I said before, if someone asked me not to do something, so I ended up giving that episode to his family and Streetlight Manifesto, the band. And then the one that was released that you can find on the feed became kind of this beacon and a pillar for certain people in that ska and the people who are affected by it, because there's an hour-long recording of his voice. Or for me personally, like, I have an hour-long conversation with my friend who is dead. And like, I still get sad thinking about it, but like, I can hear him again. And I guess that's like the part of the podcasting I never clicked with me, was that like, you're building a legacy in a weird way. Like, one day Felicity can come back and listen to how dumb her dad was or something. So I think that's probably answers your question before of what it means. Besides all the business stuff, at the emotional level, like, you don't know what's going to come out of it. Like, I've gone back and listened to it when I miss them. Yeah. That we can talk about the good what's next too. But
powerful process, and
shout out to Netta for that, who I got to meet in real life, and she's from Canada. And now we're working on and one other person who changed my life from the podcast is Sean Michael Cologne. He came on to promote in 2015 Fat Wreck, the documentary he was making. A few years later, we did the punk rock documentary filmmakers roundtable together, and then he hired Nathan and I to help him with the marketing, podcast strategy, and sponsorship and product placement for his documentary Age of Audio about podcasting, which, like, my friend Chuck is working on it a little bit, and Sonetta is working on it a little bit. So all of a sudden, there's all this cool stuff. I'm like, I'm working on a fucking documentary. Yeah, it's wild.
Really
it's
cool
wild,
guy. Really
man.
cool guy. You were nice enough to introduce him to me.
Oh, yeah. And he's a great guy, and that's going to be a great doc. And
yeah.
And then the last person I would say who never came on the show was Blake Larson. We both in Rhode Island, fellow podcasters. When he became the media manager at the digital marketing agency and needed to make his first hire, for whatever reason, we had never met in person, only online. I was his first call, and I left my job in healthcare. And then I really learned this shit. Yeah. And then I got a job I like better now.
It's a good journey, great journey to be on. Oh yeah, no. What is the next one? What's going to show up on the feed? What's the new show? Yeah, so Nathan and I officially became an LLC in January. We run Let's Chat Podcasting, so we help people at any level, for beginners or someone who's been doing it forever. Get you mic ready, provide a media kit,
guest training, booking, all sorts of things. We could chat about that. That stuff's for later. From that, Nathan and I are launching the Podcasters of Podcasting. Is going to be the new podcast that's going to be taking over this feed. And I've decided that I don't have time to do both. So I'm going to produce it and Nathan's going to host it. And I'll be on it at some point, I'm sure, at some level, but I'll be behind the scenes. And then Hey Rhody is where I'm putting all my public stuff for now.
Very nice. And it's Hey Rhody on podcast platforms, I assume.
Yep. I'll podcast it's Rhode Island specific, but I don't think you need to live here to like it.
It's so funny with some of the regional podcasts I've heard. And once again, go for the topic, stay for the hosts. I've always found that indie podcasts are worth trying just to hear the host, because you find a dynamic and a chemistry that you enjoy, and it really brightens your,
I have a co-host again.
Life. It's fun.
It's fun and doing it with another person, and my friend and Jenna. So my friend Jenna and I, we both started at Hey Rhody Media about a couple weeks apart, and then just became immediately. She was a teacher, and then we both had worked in those jobs you don't want to work at during the pandemic, and came out the other side.
Holy cow! Yeah.
So immediately just became buddies, and want to co-host? Like, okay. And she's never been on a podcast before, So it's been a lot of fun. It's fun having someone to do it with again. And Nick, the old host, is still producing and part of it. So it's really great. So it's going to be Nathan is going to be interviewing people in the podcast world and podcast adjacent world. And essentially, as of now, formats change, but the format we're working on is essentially he's going to ask every guest the same 3 questions. He wants to what's your origin story? What's your leap of faith? And what's that? And what do you think his last one is?
Credit card.
Oh, what's your superpower? We were inspired by Spider-Verse. Okay. Yeah, so those kind of along the lines of podcast adjacent people.
I love it.
Nathan, I met because he came on he knew my old co-host and came on Let's Chat 11 years ago. And now we're business partners. Awesome. And best buds.
Cool. Well, so people can go to Hey Rhody, look that up anywhere. And for those that are hearing this, you just stay subscribed to this feed here. If I may share some of this with my listeners as well, so they know if they're going to look up for the new show. Is it going to be named? What do they look up? Is the feed
Podcasters of Podcasting?
Sorry, say it again. I talked over you.
Podcasters of Podcasting. I will have to figure out all that back end stuff because I haven't gotten there yet. It's funny that you say that. It's oh, I'll figure all that out because that's the stuff I got paid a lot of money to do. No, I'm sorry. That's the stuff I did not get paid a lot of money to do.
Yeah. It's like anything else. It's easy if we know how to do it. And, just like it's nice work if you can get it, just like podcasting. And you got it. And you can get it, even though that's not always what that means. I can't
thank you enough. You've been such a good friend and collaborator over the years.
It's an honor for me to be here and to ask me to be the host of your finale here is really an honor for me. And I appreciate it very much. So
you were always so generous too. You've had me on Broken Brain several times and I always got tons of listeners from that. And
well, thank you so much. And I'll just mention while I'm on here that you can hear Chris on background or backlogged episodes and future episodes, I'm sure, of The Broken Brain, because I love to talk with you. We do a Patreon show on my Patreon, which is The Broken Chat. If you want a link to anything that I'm doing, if I can so humbly plug this, but one of the best places to go if you search The Broken Brain anywhere for podcasts, but also go to dwighthurst.com, and I have a lot of things that tie in both with the podcast, also some free materials for mental health and mentally healthy things. We're this year putting a lot of together. I'm using a lot of RPGs and tabletop one-shot games that we're writing and recording and doing some things with that's coming out. And so that's free that you can get. And if you want to pitch in and be part of it too. So I'll just throw that out there if you don't mind on the feed. And we will, that's the outro music that I hit play accidentally early. So here we go. Thank you again, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Chris, for your kindness, your art that you share. Love you. And love all of you out there, too.
Hey there, can't you find me? You're stranded between stations. station ID. I'll backsell if you pay me. I'm playing songs from all the bands that I love because no one ever calls it. And the record's spinning as the clock is ticking, and I don't know who is listening. Switching